A lot of buyers hear the word ag exemption and they think it works like a normal exemption, like a homestead exemption, but it doesn't work that way. And that misunderstanding can lead to misexpectations when you're looking to buy a property with acreage in Denton County. I get questions like, hey, can you get an ag exemption on a property under 5 acres in Denton County? And you would think that question would have a straightforward answer logically. But before you can really attack that question, the first step is understanding how property taxes and exemptions work in Texas. Let's jump in. The first point to touch on is that taxes are collected at the county level, and then they're made up of different tax units. If you buy a property outside the city limits, you will always have the county tax and the ISD, or the independent school district tax. So as an example, this property is valued at $450,000, and you can see the Denton County tax rate is 0.186%, and then Denton ISD is 1.2. Now let's jump into how exemptions come into play. The four real types of exemptions are your homestead exemption, your over 65, and then disabled person, disabled vet, and surviving spouse. The most common one is the homestead exemption. In Texas, you get to allocate one property as your homestead, and that's basically just the property where you live. Then if you're over 65, you get an over 65 exemption that sits on top of the homestead. So with homestead, it's increased over the last couple of years, which is awesome. So now it's $140,000. Same $450,000 valuation, but you can see the $140,000 exemption for Denton ISD, and then the county exemption has a $5,000 exemption as well. So the difference between these two, and this is really pretty average, is about $1,700 a year with that homestead exemption applied. This comes out to $141 a month. This is why I always, if you buy a house that is your primary residence, always put the homestead exemption on there. There's a couple other benefits too that I won't get into right now. So notice I didn't mention ag or agricultural exemption as part of this list. That's not by accident, even though basically everyone you talk to, they'll say ag exemption and they use that term. It's technically not the way that it works at the county level. So this is done by ag valuation, where that qualifying or agricultural use is taxed based on productivity versus just your typical standard exemption. So the tax savings may feel similar, but the mechanism is actually different. What makes this more confusing as well is that the math that the county uses really isn't easy to follow when you look at it on the tax website. Typically what they do is they just offset whatever value that they've given that land. So I like to look at it as a per acre situation. So they offset the value of each acre when you're using it for things like improved pasture, honeybees, and livestock. There's one other really big point too to note here. If there is a house on the property, they're going to carve out 1 acre and call that the home site. So where the house sits, which means you won't get any ag use. And so it's going to be taxed at the full amount, that 1 acre. So before you assume that a property is ag exempt, the better question is what part of the land is being used for ag use and for how long? And once you understand that ag use is not an exemption, it's a valuation, and that not every acre is treated the same, the next question becomes one that's really typical, which is how many acres are needed for ag use to be able to get that ag valuation and get a big break on your tax. That's what we're going to be covering in the next video. If you're looking at a property with land in Denton County and want help thinking through the financing side, either before or after you made an offer, I'd love to help out. Reach out so we can come up with a game plan.